What happens when one man tries to watch all of the sci-fi films of the 1980s? Well, we're about to find out because I'm your host, Josh Spiegel, and this is the 80s Project. Alright, we are into 84 now, and sci-fi is in full swing. And, 84 has some of the biggest and most impactful sci-fi of any year in frickin' history. But, maybe a little bit later this year, huh? This block picks up on March 9th, and we get a look at the sillier side of 84 with Voyage of the Rock Aliens. We have a guitar-shaped spaceship cruising through the galaxy, and there's a robot on there named Robot 1359. And it's looking through different planets' cultures, and they find one with rival motorcycle gangs. And one is led by Jermaine freaking Jackson. And he's wearing this jacket, which I swear Michael ended up stealing the look of. He leads a musical number as the gangs clash, but he's kind of in love with the other's leader, played by Pia Zadora, shortly after winning the Golden Globe for Best New Star of 1982, but after winning the 83 Razzies for Worst New Star and Worst Actress. 1359 isn't interested in that planet though, although I'm not sure why, because it looked pretty rad. But then he finds Earth and thinks it looks promising, so he wakes the crew by de-shrinking them, and they get their own song.
What did you think? We didn't think at all, but we had the world in the palm of our hand.
And they look like Devo, and the song has a Devo flavor, but let me tell ya, it ain't Devo. They land on Earth, and Zadora is here too, as a different character, and there's some sort of tentacle creature in the lake, but I guess it's lucky that it isn't anime. The leader of the Nightbreed is here, and confidentiality prevents me from telling you my story about Craig Sheffer next to me at the hospital, but it's a pretty wild story. But forget I mentioned it. Maud is here too, and I didn't mention this earlier, but if the voice of 1359 sounds familiar, it's because it's none other than Peter Cullen, Optimus Prime himself, and he disguises himself as a fire hydrant to blend in. For some reason, this girl sees the badges on their suit that just say ABCD and like JKLM, and instead of just saying that's the alphabet, she's like, oh, your name's Absid and Jacqueline? Absid falls for Dee Dee, but she's also dating Frankie, and he's the jealous type. But then Pluto's here as well. And, oh yeah, the name of the town they're in is Spielberg. Get it? Everything is leading up to the big battle of the bands where the aliens plan to go up against the Pack, but there's also Chainsaw and the Breather. And don't forget that tentacle thing. And all of this silliness is care of James Fargo, director of Every Which Way But Loose and The Enforcer, both with Clint Eastwood, and Forced Vengeance with Chuck Norris, so he was clearly the right choice for this over-the-top musical comedy, right? It was originally meant to be a spoof of B-movies, but then was picked up and changed into a campy musical that was still sort of a spoof, I guess. And what's funny is that bit in the beginning with Jermaine Jackson was an actual music video for his duet with Pia, and that song is in the movie later on, with Sheffer doing the Jackson parts, but just lip-syncing it. But they liked the actual video and worked it into the plot. It seems like then it was basically just dumped since it wasn't given any sort of formal release and was given only a very limited run, much to the chagrin of the new wave band Rema, who played the rock aliens in the movie. They were told that the movie was meant to be a jumping off point, and that the rock aliens would then have their own Saturday morning cartoon show. According to one of the band members, the decision to not give the film a wider release may have been influenced by Zadora, and says that she felt it didn't fit the image she wanted to convey. But he also said he didn't know if that was true or not, just that the film didn't get that full release. Since then, it's picked up a bunch of steam as a cult classic and campy treasure. And I'm giving this a 3.5. It's just so stupid, but in the best way possible. Like, the songs aren't good, the story's a mess, but everyone seems to be having fun, and so was I while I was watching it. The sci-fi cultural significance is just a 2 since it does have a handful of names in there and has built up a bit of status over time, but it's still mostly unseen. Should you watch it? Yes, go on this voyage.
Okay, fine.
What's the matter? Can't you get it on?
Oh, nuts!
Hey. No way to treat your tools.
Let's go back over to Italy now, and I really feel like here on the Sci-Fi Project, every other film has been from Italy, but over there, on March 10th, there was The Final Executioner. We're set after a nuclear war, so it's likely that we're doing another Mad Max riff, and all of the people who survived are sectioned off into clean people and contaminated. If you're determined to be contaminated, you're loaded up onto these trains and shipped off into the wasteland. They send out Alan here, and he and his wife aren't contaminated, but when he speaks out against the brutality of the regime, they send him out anyway. Out there, a group of marauder-looking dudes that are hunters, and their whole shtick is that they stalk and kill the contaminated, and claim to have killed like 80 million. And whoa, that's like a lot of people. Like, if they had been doing it for 20 years, they'd still have to kill over 11,000 people a day in order to do that. So they assault Alan's wife and then shoot him and lead him for dead. But he's rescued by Sam, played by classic Western actor Woody Strode. Sam is a retired cop, and he helps Alan get trained up in order to fight back against the hunters and get his revenge. And this one is by Romolo Guerrieri, and he had been directing since the 60s, starting out doing a bunch of spaghetti westerns. This would end up being one of his last films, though. After this, he took a 7-year break, coming back to do 2 TV movies in 91 and in 93, and then retired. And this one took a weird turn because it didn't really make any money, and the producers were pretty bummed out by that, and several years later, they tried to make up for it by taking a rather large chunk of the footage and then slapping it into a new movie in 1989 called The Bronx Executioner. They just used a bunch of scenes and redubbed them to fit their new storyline. And this one's kinda meh. It's a 2. It's just too low-key for most of the time. But there's a handful of amusing bits, but they're too few and far between. Plus, it's a post-apocalyptic movie that spends about 70% of its runtime in a regular-looking house. The SFCS is just a 1, since it's not well known at all and blends with all the other Mad Max ripoffs and just didn't make any sort of name for itself. Should you watch it? I'd say skip it, and that's final. We're staying across the ocean now and moving up to Poland for this one that arrived on May 14th, and it's called Sex Mission. It's set in the far-off future of 1991, and we're at a press conference as a scientist has claimed to have mastered the science of cryonics, and plans to freeze 2 men and then wake them up 3 years later in 1994. The experiment commences, and they're then woken up and immediately notice some oddities. All of their attendants are beautiful women, and the food is different, and they're soon told that there was a massive war, and they weren't woken up and a lot more time has passed than they expected. In fact, it's 2044, 50 years later than they were planned, and yep, we're closer to that far future date right now than we are from the time that this movie was made, so go take your back pill, everyone. Seems that in those 50 years there's been a massive nuclear war, and all males have long been extinct, and the human race had been surviving through asexual reproduction. They're kept in a cell and are under constant observation and cause troubles when they eat the sacred apples. And since they're determined to be a danger in their society as men, they opt to make them into women. When they refuse, they're put on trial with the options looking to be either the surgery or being killed. Their only option becomes to escape, and then they have to hope that the outside world is any safer. And I mentioned that this one was Polish, and it's by Juliusz Marczulski, and he had gained notoriety over there very quickly for making very commercial films that also strongly satirized Polish and world politics. This was a period of a lot of unrest over there, which I discussed back in the '81 project with War of the Worlds Next Century. When this was released, it was censored before making it to the theaters, with whole section of the film being removed. But it's not solely a political satire, as it also served as a commentary on the War of the Sexes, and ended up being very controversial, but also very popular. It became Poland's highest-grossing film of all time, and stayed that way until 2011, and various film magazines have claimed it to be the best film to come out of the country. And it's fun, but I think you may have had to be there, so I'll give it a 3. It might be a little too entrenched in their current events for all the satire to hit, but it's still entertaining and funny, but also perhaps too long at a little over 2 hours. The SFCS is just a 1 since it's not known over here at all, and for as much of an impact as it had in its native country, it didn't make a peep over here. Should you watch it? Yeah, I think so. Like, it's a little bit Idiocracy before Idiocracy, but it's also really not. Let's head back into Fantasyland here and go all the way over to Indonesia for a film that doesn't have a known release, and it's Golok Setan, otherwise known as The Devil's Sword. It begins with a meteor falling to Earth and a man recovering some sort of mystical sword out of the ashes. We then witness a young man sacrifice himself in order to restore the Crocodile Queen, who rises up and is immediately just like in an orgy. She wants to stop the wedding of the princess of a small village because they haven't been paying the proper tribute, so she sends her warrior, Banyu Yaga, to do so, and he does it in the coolest way possible. They defy him, so he lays waste to a bunch of them in some badass ways, with the princess herself doing most of the fighting. Eventually, another warrior gets involved and matches Banyu Yaga for abilities and speed, but eventually, Crocodile Men are able to kidnap Sanjaya, and wasn't that an American Idol guy at one point? It doesn't seem to go that bad for him, really, but then that heroic dude finds out that his master has been gravely wounded by the Crocs. He has to amputate, and based on this scene alone, I feel like I should have slotted this into the horror version of the project. Turns out that Banyu Yaga also used to train with them and betrayed the master, so he sends Mandala out to retrieve the Devil's Sword and help. Also, Banyu gets busy with the Croc Queen, and she transforms into an actual crocodile in the middle of it. And it looks like the dude just keeps going. Why not, right? Along the way, there's a cool skeleton ferryman, crocodile men, this guy's head, which I can't tell if it's meant to be bald or a hat because the skin tone is different, and also the top of his head is wider than the rest of it, and lots more insanity. I mentioned that this one is from Indonesia, and it was directed by Ratno Timoer, and it was one of his earlier films, although he didn't really make that many, and they were all in his home country. It's got Barry Prima in it, and he was a big star over there, and he even got a bit of recognition over here, and his main claim to fame was playing Jaka Sembung, a character from a comic book. Based on that success, they did this one, also from a comic, one of the most popular of the time. This one was very successful over there, and even got a sequel in 1987 called Mandala from the Snake River, with Prima returning in the lead role. And I'm giving this a 3.5. It's wacky and goofy and over the top and just what I like to see. If you love Big Trouble in Little China and want to see the type of movie that it's emulating, this is one of them. The significance is just a 1 though, since it's not known over here much at all, and again, maybe more significant back in Indonesia, but just not here. Should you watch it? If you like silly action films where heads are getting cut off every 10 minutes, then absolutely.
Majesty! How come? You bitch!
This is another one that didn't have a set release date, and it's weird that it's in the same block as Voyage of the Rock Aliens, because it's Strangers in Paradise. It starts in 1939 in Berlin, as Hitler encounters a famous mesmerist who happens to look a lot like him. And then there's a full-on musical number by a cabaret band, and they say it's their final performance since the club is shutting down. Jonathan is here too, and he volunteers to be a subject for a cryogenic experiment to sleep until the war is over. And geez, it's also weird that this is in the same block as Sex Mission. It's then modern times, and punk rockers are all over, disappointing their parents. There's some sort of military operation in which they're trying to brainwash the punk teens in order to make them what they call better. This leads to several musical numbers and wild outfits, and they realize their experiments don't work because the subjects go right back to their wild ways. This upsets the villains of the film, who want everyone to conform to their version of morality and want to shape sexuality and the way that people dress that they like, and hey, that sounds familiar. They read about the experiment with Jonathan, and they decide to thaw him out, making sure to do a song and dance routine while they do. He has trouble adjusting, and they get him to use his mesmerism on some subjects to cure them of their horrible, horrible gayness. And then gets a filthy, filthy rock and roller to switch to country music. But then Johnny starts to hang out with the general's daughter and realizes that, I don't know, maybe the people who are just living their lives the way they want and not trying to change others are the normal ones after all. And this one's from 80s Project regular Uli Lommel. We already featured him with The Boogeyman, Brainwaves, Olivia, Boogeyman 2, and the Devonsville Terror, so he was really cranking them out, but this is very far removed from anything else that we've seen him do. Not only did he direct, he also co-wrote the film with his wife, Susanna Love, and he stars in the film as both Jonathan and Hitler. It's clear that casting himself was a bit of a nod to his own role as a filmmaker, and Jonathan's backstory was based on Lommel's own father, as he was German, born just as the war was ending. It didn't really get much of a release, so it slipped to the wayside and has never been released outside of VHS. And I'm giving this a 3.5 as well, and I've enjoyed the past couple of Lommel flicks, which is wild because his later films are some of the worst things I've had to sit through, but this is a blast. It's silly and fun, and even if the songs aren't great, the musical numbers are a good time. The significance is just a 1.5 though, since no one knows what this is, and even Lommel fans aren't too up on it, and it only gets the 0.5 because it's part of his catalog. Should you watch it? If you watched Voyage of the Rock Aliens and were like, this should be more about the downfall of fascism, then yeah.
It's easy, just 1, 2, 3, it's magic.
This is weird because this next one debuted in Colombia on May 15th, but then rolled out in other countries one by one before hitting the US in December of '85, and it's She. It begins in the future, 23 years after something called The Cancellation, which I'm going to assume was a nuclear apocalypse, and there's this little trading post. However, as per the formula of sword and sorcery movies, a group of marauders then attacks, all sporting swastikas, so you know they're the bad guys, I mean, at least to some people. But then there's also this group that worship a woman called She, and it's Valeria herself, Sandal Bergman. Tom and Dick managed to survive the massacre, and their sister was captured, and her name was Harry. Get it? They go off in search of her, but end up captured by She's soldiers, and they leave Tom in the desert for dead. He's not though, and he goes to get his brother. Meanwhile, she faces a gauntlet of enemies, including a Frankenstein robot whose head she explodes, and is given a prophecy that a man will gain her heart and destroy her. Right after, the boys manage to kidnap her and use her to escape, although they very quickly find themselves up against other nefarious forces in the wasteland with chainsaws. She comes to feel bad for them and lets them go, but both groups end up in a variety of rough situations, including glowing-eyed telekinetics, and they have to form an alliance to survive, and also take down the villainous Norks. This is yet another one that's out of Italy and dips into the whole post-apocalypse Mad Max stuff, although this one takes that and blends it with Conan for a double-sided ripoff. It was co-written and directed by Avi Nesher, and it's an earlier film for him, but he didn't do much notable outside of this film and the '93 Drew Barrymore horror flick Doppelganger. This one was based on a novel from 1887 called She, A History of Adventure by H. Rider Haggard, and was massively popular in that time frame. It had been previously adapted a number of times, in fact, including a 1965 version with Ursula Andress in the title role. This particular version is rather loosely based on the book though, as it moves things into that post-nuclear world, whereas the story is set in modern times. Well, 1887 modern times. There is no box office information available on this one, and it likely didn't have too wide of a theatrical release here, but it just never really made it that big into the public eye. Much later, in 2001, there was yet another version of She, but again, was a new take on the novel as opposed to a direct remake of this film. And this is super fun. It's a 3.5 again. This is what you call a kitchen sink movie, since it's throwing so many different things at you. Robots, vampires, mutants, everything, and it's having a blast while it does it. The SFCS is a 1.5 though, since it just never really got that well known, and even though I feel like it deserved more attention, it really didn't have it. Should you watch it? Yes, She commands it.
Where's all your evidence? Hi, Rob. You dirty rat! I'll get you for that, see? You killed my brother!
We'll wrap this block up one day later, back in the US, on March 16th, and check out The Ice Pirates. We're told that water is now the most valuable thing in the entire universe, and that an evil group called the Templars control it all. But there's a band of pirates that are dedicated to fighting them. We meet our crew of swashbucklers in the middle of a raid, and one is Spencer for Hire, and another is the Manimal's best friend. But Morticia is here too, as is Hellboy. They find a sleeping princess that's probably on her way to Dallas, but they're mainly just after these big blocks of ice, and use robots to help them out. But right before they're able to get away with a big haul, Jason decides to also kidnap that princess. They almost get away, but Jason and Roscoe are captured and locked away, where they meet Sloth, and are taken off to be castrated. Luckily, Princess Karina rescues them, and does so in order to have them help her find her father, who has been looking for a lost seventh world which contains a massive amount of water. Look for a small role from the legendary John Carradine as the head of the Templar, and a bit of an Alien parody with a small creature loose in the ship that's a space harpy. But when they find out the location of that lost planet, they all set out to live out their lives on a watery oasis. This was directed by Stuart Raffel, and his name should probably be more infamous than it is. He directed this movie, which is pretty silly fun, but then did The Philadelphia Experiment, a much more serious sci-fi flick that we'll talk about later this year, but then did Mac and Me, Mannequin on the Move, and Tammy and the T-Rex, so he's clearly a man who knows his cheese. This was originally meant to be a bigger budgeted and far more serious film with a script by Stanford Sherman, who also wrote Krull. MGM had the script in their roster where it was called The Water Planet, and they were going to give it a $20 million budget. But then, the studio started having some financial troubles, and had just gone through a merger and restructuring with United Artists. they slashed the bankroll to $8 million and hired Raffel to come on board and do a rewrite, making it more of a comedy. That was at the director's request, not the studio's, as he wasn't interested in doing a straightforward Star Wars style flick and thought that embracing these sillier aspects would be the way to go. But that wasn't the ending of their troubles, since the new studio head didn't like the producer and tried to sabotage the project any way that he could, including removing the film's original ending. And it appears as if that ending is now lost. The reviews weren't great, and it's still sitting at a 17% on Rotten Tomatoes, and it didn't make too big of a dent at the box office, since it only brought in around $15 million, which was a profit, although likely not when you factor in marketing and such. It did have a really healthy life on cable, where it ran nearly non-stop for a while, and developed a decent-sized cult following over the years. And sure, it's not good, but I dig it, and so it's a 3.5, and I'd probably go 3.75 for nostalgia, but it's not a 4. It's dumb and doesn't make much sense, but this is just so much fun that I can't help but enjoy watching it. The SFCS is a 3.5 since it did get seen on the secondary market a lot, I mean, if not the theater, but it never built up any sort of mainstream following, and no follow-ups, but it did get a bunch of cable runs and has a ton of recognizable faces in it. Should you watch it? Yes, and remember that those that hoard resources from those that need them in order to profit are the villains. So there you have it. 84 is in full swing now with the sci-fi, fantasy, all that stuff going on here. My favorite in this block, there was a few that I enjoyed quite a bit, so there's a lot of 3.5s here, but I think my favorite of this block that I would watch again very quickly would be Ice Pirates. I just have nostalgia for it. I watched it so many times as a kid. Let me know which is your favorite down below in the comments. I want to hear that. Which of these have you seen? Which of these would you now like to see? Tell me that down below. I want to hear that as well. If you like the video, hit that like button. If you enjoy the channel, subscribe to it, of course, and hit the bell to get notified when new videos come out. And check out my Patreon page to help keep this going. Because, yeah, we're going to keep on plugging along. We're going to keep on chugging through 1984 right here on the 80s Project.